Hey friends, welcome back to the Nourished Child podcast. I'm Jill Castle, your host, and today I'm focusing on whether it's okay for a young teen to be a pescatarian. This is a question from a listener who wrote in, and I love answering questions from my listeners, and so today I thought I would tackle this one.
Welcome to the Nourished Child podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey friends, I'm Jill Castle, a pediatric dietitian, mom to 4 kids, and host of this podcast. I started this podcast in 2016 as a way to help families and healthcare professionals learn more about nutrition and feeding kids. My goal has always been to make nourishing your families easier through breaking down science into understandable concepts you can put into practice right away and shedding light on and improving the emotional well-being of kids through feeding and food. You can always go deeper on my website, thenourishedchild.com, where I have resources for children ages birth through teen. I'm always so grateful you're here, and I hope you enjoy the show. I will read her question in just a minute, but I wanted to remind you that you too can ask your question. You can email with your question, or you can go to thenourishedchild.com/podcast, and you will see a little icon in the middle of the page that is from SpeakPipe. And what you can do is click on the voice record button, and you can actually just talk to me with your question in your own voice, and we'll share it here on the podcast. So this is what a listener wrote to me. Dear Jill, my daughter is 14 and has decided to become a pescatarian. She generally comes up with ideas and new plans, but she doesn't stick to them for very long. I've learned to just let her do it because they often fade away. I didn't expect her to stick to this. Her favorite food has always been burgers, but she has been sticking to it for over a month now. What nutrients could she be missing by not eating meat? Also, I'm wondering if she could get too much fish or too much of a certain fish. She likes sardines and wants me to buy more. They are so handy, I think. I'm sure she wouldn't end up eating sardines every day, but I did get nervous wondering. She also likes salmon for dinners. Any thoughts you have on this would be so appreciated. Okay, so let's dive into this because I want to first clarify what it means to be a pescatarian, and then I also want to address some of the nutritional benefits and watch-outs of being a pescatarian. And I'll end this episode with some of the common mistakes I see teens who want to be any type of vegetarian, I see them making. So let's go first with what does it mean to be a pescatarian? So a pescatarian is a person who doesn't eat any meat, but he or she does eat fish and other shellfish. So basically they eat plant-based foods like fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and beans, and they stay away from foods like meat and poultry. Specifically, they don't eat beef, chicken, pork, lamb, turkey, or wild game like venison. Now, some pescatarians may eat eggs and dairy, and some pescatarians may not. So you can think of a pescatarian eating pattern as sort of a plant-based eating pattern with fish or seafood, and that is contributing all those omega-3 fats, which I'll talk about in a bit. What are some of the nutrition benefits of being a pescatarian? Well, in general, pescatarian is a plant-based diet. It's plant-heavy. It leans heavy on plants. And we know from research that this has, in fact, been associated with a lowered risk of heart disease and diabetes, And it also may lower the risk of developing a condition like heart disease, which could be associated with excess body fat. Fish and seafood is packed with nutrients for the brain and the bones, such as, and specifically, omega-3 fatty acids, calcium, and vitamin D. And seafood is also a really good source of protein. But let's talk about omega-3 fats, because I don't feel like this is discussed very much when it comes to children. Fish and seafood are the best ways to get omega-3 fatty acids like DHA and EPA. Of course, you can get them from supplements, plant-based supplements, in fact, but if you're looking for sort of a natural whole food that contains omega-3 fats, fish is one of the most concentrated sources of them. Omega-3 fats help the heart, your child's mood, and brain functioning. Oily fish like salmon or trout naturally contain DHA and EPA and are considered the highest fish sources of omega-3 fats. Now, fish and seafood is also a really good source of protein. And when children and teenagers follow a plant-based diet, especially if they're following a more strict plant-based eating pattern like veganism, optimal amounts of protein may be hard to get enough of. So seafood, as in a pescatarian eating pattern, is a wonderful source of protein in this case. Other nutrients can be found in seafood and shellfish. Bivalves like oysters, of which I have a lot on my property, a lot of oysters on my property. Bivalves like oysters and mussels have a very high concentration of B12, zinc, and selenium, and these are essential nutrients for the brain and body. So you can see the addition of fish and seafood to a plant-based diet can carry some high sources of protein and omega-3 fats, calcium, and vitamin D for your child. What are some of the watch-outs of a pescatarian eating pattern? Well, some fish and seafood are sources of mercury and other toxins, which is something you do want to pay attention to when you're feeding a child. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration recommends that young children and women of childbearing age, especially pregnant and nursing women, avoid some of the fish that are high in mercury, specifically tilefish, swordfish, shark, and king mackerel. These individuals, young children and women of childbearing age and pregnant and nursing women, should also limit albacore and yellowfin tuna to 1 serving or less per week. Light tuna, on the other hand, and that's something you can get in the can at the grocery store, is lower in mercury, and it's fine to eat 2 to 3 servings a week. A lot of this information you can find on the Seafood Watch website, which is a publication put out by the Monterey Bay Aquarium. They have a list of fish that are caught or farmed in ethical ways. They also have a list of safe fish for kids to eat, which have the lowest mercury content. So I'll go over some of those right now because I think if you're listening to this, you're like, okay, pescatarian sounds really healthy, but you're telling me I need to watch out for how much seafood that contains mercury that my child eats in a week. So what are those safer fish for my children? What are the fish that contains the lower amounts of mercury? So let's talk about that. According to the Environmental Defense Fund's Seafood Selector, again, a website for you as a resource, and I'll connect these in the show notes, and the Monterey Bay Aquarium's Seafood Watch, these are the safest fish to eat. So get ready for this list, and if you have a pen and paper, go for it. You can write these things down. So the first one is wild salmon, and this can be fresh, frozen, or canned. Arctic char, Atlantic mackerel. You do want to pay attention and limit the consumption of Spanish and king versions of Atlantic mackerel, as they may be higher in mercury.
kids change a lot. Their nutrition needs, eating habits, and food preferences do too. So much so, it can be hard to keep up. The Nourished Child, a website designed for parents who want more nutrition education, helps parents like you get crystal clear on raising good eaters. We've cracked the code on nourishing the whole child, whether you're raising a baby, a teen, or a child with health concerns. Our nutrition school and parent education programs help you get the inside scoop on food and nutrients, positive food parenting, and building self-motivated, autonomous kids who are good eaters. Visit thenourishedchild.com today.
Sardines, so my listener asked specifically about sardines. They are considered one of the safest fish to eat. So sardines are on this list. Sablefish or black cod, you want to limit those to 2 servings per month for children because they do have a moderate amount of mercury content. Anchovies are high in omega-3 fatty acids and low in mercury, so they are also considered safe to eat. Oysters, which I mentioned before, rainbow trout, albacore tuna, caught from the North Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean. There is a caveat. You want to limit to 2 servings per month in children under 5 years, again, due to a moderate mercury content. Mussels are safe. Pacific halibut, again, a limit to 2 servings per month in children under 5, again, because of the moderate mercury content. Rockfish and catfish that's raised in the U.S. Other countries of origin may be contaminated with mercury, so catfish from the U.S. is considered safe. And if you want to understand what some of those common mistakes teens make when they're going meat-free or they're exploring pescatarian eating patterns or some sort of vegetarian eating pattern like lacto-vegetarian or lacto-ovo vegetarianism, where children will have milk in a plant-based diet or they'll have milk and eggs with a plant-based diet. There are some kind of universal mistakes I've seen teens make over the years, over the decades I've been working with them, and I wanted to just highlight them a little bit. One, some teenagers will make the mistake of not replacing animal sources of protein with plant sources of protein. And what I'm talking about is, replacing chicken with beans or tofu, for example. You can help your team a lot by making sure there's a good source of protein at each meal. Another mistake they make is they miss out on important nutrients like iron, calcium, or vitamin B12. On a pescatarian diet, calcium can become more of a concern if teens don't drink milk or eat dairy foods. In that case, calcium will need to come from other foods like dark leafy greens, calcium-set tofu, alternate milks that are calcium fortified, like oat milk, for example, and fortified cereals. There are other foods as well, but I'm keeping the list short for you here. Thirdly, almost all teenagers are at risk for iron inadequacy. My last episode touched on teen diets and highlighted how 1 out of every 5 teens in the U.S. are short on iron intake. Pescatarians can find iron from beans, tofu, green leafy vegetables, and cereal. So iron is definitely something to pay attention to. Fish and seafood, though, are excellent sources of iron, especially tuna and mackerel and salmon. And clams and salmon are especially a good source of vitamin B12 also, which in a plant-based eating pattern may fall short depending on the foods you're selecting and how frequently you're eating sources of B12. Some vegetarians will eat a heavily processed diet, meaning that they are going for fast food, they're having low fiber pasta, mac and cheese pizza, that sort of diet. Not that those foods are bad. They are not bad foods, But sometimes I have seen teenagers who are exploring a plant-based diet or vegetarianism or pescatarianism for that matter, go for more convenient, quote unquote, kid food, if you will. What ends up being sort of problematic is A, the variety of nutrients may not be great in that situation, but also sometimes the fiber in their diet is not enough. So whole grains like whole wheat bread, whole grain crackers, and bran-based cereals will increase fiber consumption and automatically add more nutrients, particularly folate, iron, and B vitamins. And of course, teenagers may not understand what their body needs nutritionally, which can be a problem since they are in a rapid phase of growth. It's important to help them plan balanced meals with a lot of food variety that also supplies the energy and nutrients they need for proper growth. So those are kind of the common teenage mistakes that I've seen over the years when teens are exploring a plant-based eating pattern, specifically vegetarianism or any form of vegetarianism. Now, I also see mistakes from parents, and here's the biggest mistake I see, and that is that parents can also be hands-off when their teen decides to go vegetarian or vegan. So I'm going to caution you about that because being a dietitian who's worked with many teens over the years and who has raised her own teenagers, I want to encourage you to stay involved in your teens' eating patterns and food selection because teens can be really lazy about food and they can choose those less than healthy options if they're available and obvious. So to counteract that, we want to make sure those nutrient-rich food options are easy to get, they're available, they're obvious for teens, because the tendency for teens oftentimes is to grab what's available because it's easy and it's right there for them. So staying involved is really important as a parent. And in some teenagers who are pursuing vegetarianism, unfortunately, they may be pursuing it as a form of weight control or weight loss, as a way to control their diet. And so when you are involved in your child or your teenager's eating patterns, food selection in a healthy way, you will also be able to pick up on any disordered or restrictive eating patterns before they get ingrained and problematic. So again, is it okay for a young teen to be a pescatarian? Yes, it is. And it's quite a healthy blend and a healthy eating pattern for teens and adults and children. I think my word of encouragement to you would be to stay involved and engaged in what your child is eating. Look at the types of fish and just do a quick check based on this list, and I'll include this in the show notes as well. But do a quick check and just make sure you're spot on with mercury content, lower mercury versions of fish and seafood, and keep aiming for the stars when it comes to food variety and food balance and a nutritious diet for your family. And I think you'll be just dandy. That's it for today, folks. Thank you for listening to the Nourished Child podcast. Again, if you have your questions, head over to thenourishedchild.com/podcast and hit the speak pipe button and ask your questions with your real voice, and I'll be happy to answer them. Or you can email me, jill@jillcastle.com. That's it. If you're not on my email newsletter, which comes out every Monday, The Munch, you can also join it when you visit thenourishedchild.com. Until next time, give that child in your life a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.